They fired me for thinking I worked 2 jobs. 3 days later, their entire multi-billion-dollar global supply chain seized. Meanwhile, I was building a new empire. The Monday morning air in the conference room they called the Citadel was thin, cold, and recycled. It was the company's executive fishbowl, a glass box suspended above the 24/7 Global Operations Center, designed to make you feel exposed and insignificant. It was a room for executions, not conversations. David Chen, the director of human resources, slid a tablet across the polished obsidian table. David was a man who seemed assembled from a corporate policy manual, all bland professionalism and zero empathy. He avoided my gaze, focusing on a point somewhere over my left shoulder, a classic sign of a man following a script he didn't write and didn't care to understand. His job was to process terminations, like a cog in a machine processing widgets. I ignored the tablet. My eyes were locked on the floor below, a sea of monitors displaying shipping routes, weather patterns, and inventory levels, the digital heartbeat of Meridian Global Logistics. Marcus Thorne, the chief operating officer, leaned forward, breaking the silence. Marcus was the opposite of David. He wasn't bland, he was dangerously slick, a man who wore a suit that cost more than my degree and radiated a predatory confidence born from inherited wealth and a complete disregard for the technical expertise that actually made the company run. He lived for moments like this. He steepled his perfectly manicured fingers on the table, a smug smirk playing on his lips. On the tablet, he'd swiped to a grainy, time-stamped security photo. It was me, my coat collar turned up against the evening chill, stepping through the main entrance of the Dalton Center. The ugly yellow digital text in the corner read 7:45 p.m., last Thursday. "We don't tolerate moonlighting, Helena," he said, his voice a smooth veneer of false disappointment. "Especially not with our largest competitor. Dalton Center. We all know who has the top 3 floors in that building. Apex Freight. The accusation was meant to be a killing blow. Traitor. Corporate spy." They thought they had me cornered. They'd found this single, blurry image and constructed an entire narrative of industrial espionage around it. They wanted it to be true. It was the perfect excuse to finally get rid of the problematic lead architect who kept submitting budget requests for more staff, who kept flagging single points of failure in their system, who kept reminding them that their entire profit margin was balanced on a razor's edge of aging infrastructure held together by one person's constant vigilance. They expected a breakdown. They expected denials, tears, probably even begging. MGL ran on a toxic brew of overwork and a manufactured sense of family that demanded absolute loyalty but offered none in return. They expected me to offer to quit the non-existent other job and rededicate my life to the MGL family. I gave them nothing. I didn't defend myself. I didn't ask a single question. I simply reached up, unclipped the lanyard from around my neck. The plastic ID badge, identifying me as Helena Sparks, lead global supply chain architect, clattered onto the tablet's screen. The sound was sharp, definitive. It cut through the smug tension in the room like a shard of glass. "You're right, Marcus," I said, my voice perfectly calm, devoid of the emotion they were so clearly craving. "Maybe I should focus on one place." The shift in the room was palpable. David Chen's mouth opened slightly, his procedural script suddenly useless. Marcus Thorne's smirk didn't disappear, but it tightened at the edges. His eyes narrowed. This wasn't in the flowchart. The prey wasn't supposed to agree with the hunter. "I accept the termination," I said. I stood up, pushing my chair back neatly against the table, a simple habit they probably mistook for submission. "As for the transition, everything you need is documented in the Ethelred system guide on the company's knowledge base." This was technically true. Ethelred, the predictive logistics algorithm I had spent 5 years building from scratch, the very brain that optimized every shipping route, every container load, every flight path for their multi-billion-dollar operation, was in fact documented. But it was a malicious truth. It was a trap. The documentation was a labyrinth of my own design, a dense, 1,000-page fortress of technical jargon, complex dependencies, and esoteric code references written for an architect with my exact institutional knowledge. It was utterly impenetrable to a junior analyst, or, worse, the outside consultants they would inevitably hire in a panic. They didn't understand. They thought the knowledge base was a magic instruction manual. They didn't realize it was written in a language only I could speak. They hadn't just fired their architect. They had fired their system's only translator. For a fleeting second, I saw a flash of pure panic in Marcus's eyes, quickly masked by his usual arrogance. He knew, abstractly, that Ethelred was my creation. But like all executives, he assumed the system just worked, a magical black box that spit out money. He never understood it was a high-performance engine, and I was the only mechanic who knew how to keep it from tearing itself apart. David Chen, flustered and back on script, tapped a button on the conference phone. "Security, we need an escort for Ms. Sparks from the Citadel." The walk was the part I dreaded, the walk of shame. We stepped out of the conference room and onto the mezzanine overlooking the operations center. The constant, energetic hum of commerce, the sound of 100 keyboards clicking, of dispatchers coordinating with ports on the other side of the world, all of it just stopped. A wave of silence radiated out from me. I saw their faces. I saw Ben from Air Freight, who had spent an entire weekend on a call with to reroute cargo around a typhoon. I saw Maria from Compliance, who always asked about my dog. They stared, some with pity, which I despised, and most with a morbid curiosity. A few of the ambitious ones were already calculating, seeing my fall as their opportunity. I kept my head high, my eyes fixed on the elevator bank. As we passed the executive wing, I glanced up. There, in his glass corner office, stood Julian Croft, my boss, the VP of Global Operations. Julian was the one who knew. He knew the risk assessments I'd written. He knew about the staffing requests I'd filed, the critical failure points I'd flagged. He was the one who had called me a rock star last quarter after I single-handedly re-architected the North American trucking network to save the company $12 million. He was standing by his window, holding his MGL-branded coffee mug, watching me be escorted out of the building. He didn't move. He didn't pick up his phone. He didn't step out to defend the single most critical asset in his entire division. He just watched, his expression unreadable. His silence was the real termination. It wasn't business. It was pure, unadulterated cowardice. He had let Marcus Thorne, a man who thought logistics was just a fancy word for moving boxes, fire the only person keeping the lights on. The elevator doors slid shut, encasing me in brushed steel and silence. My personal phone vibrated. A new text message. The message was from Eleanor Vance. 3 p.m. as scheduled. Eleanor, my contact at Vanguard Dynamics, the smarter, more agile competitor they thought I was working for. The job I was merely consulting for on weekends, completely legally, reviewing logistical flow diagrams. The job MGL's ham-fisted, paranoid investigation had just turned from a lucrative side gig into my next full-time career. I stood in the descending elevator, the sterile MGL environment fading above me. My thumb moved across the screen, steady and cold. Still 3 p.m., and I can now accept the full-time offer. The elevator doors opened to the bright, noisy lobby. I didn't hand in my badge. I'd left it upstairs on the tablet. I walked past the main security desk, pushed through the heavy glass revolving doors, and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The crisp November air hit my face. It didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a timer starting. On paper, I was the lead architect of the Logistics Strategy Department at Meridian Global Logistics. That title implies leadership. It implies a structure. It implies a team. On the official Human Resources org chart, my department had 5 positions. There was me. There was Daniel, who transferred to marketing 18 months ago after a near breakdown. There was Chloe, who went on permanent medical leave 9 months ago, citing stress-induced migraines. And there were 2 junior analyst positions that had been frozen then cut during the last budget cycle. So on paper, I led a team of 5. In reality, I was a team of 1. The streamlining initiative 3 years ago was corporate speak for a bloodletting. Budgets were frozen. Headcount was slashed, but the work didn't disappear. The responsibilities didn't vanish. They just flowed downhill until they found the one person who couldn't or wouldn't let them fail. They flowed to me. I inherited the responsibilities of all 4 ghost employees. I was the architect, the analyst, the compliance auditor, and the 24/7 incident commander for the entire global logistics network. I remember the call. It came at 2:17 in the morning on a Tuesday. The automated system alert, an alert I had custom built, was screaming a high-priority warning that the night shift operations team routinely ignored. A major shipping hub in Asia had just shut down without warning due to a sudden political crisis. It wasn't just a delay. It was a complete severing of a primary artery in our network. A failure to reroute the hundreds of millions of dollars of cargo in transit would trigger catastrophic penalty clauses with our biggest clients. I spent the next 48 hours straight in my apartment, bathed in the blue light of my monitors, fueled by coffee and adrenaline. I was manually rerouting hundreds of cargo flights and container ships, negotiating with alternate ports, and rewriting live routing tables in Ethelred, all while the digital clock on our contractual obligations was ticking down. At 6:30 a.m. on Thursday, I rerouted the final container. I had contained the breach. No client penalties were triggered. I had single-handedly prevented a failure that would have cost the company tens of millions and evaporated their reputation. My reward, delivered 2 weeks later via inter-office mail, was a $500 gift card to a steakhouse. Julian Croft had dropped by my desk. "Incredible work on that Asia incident, Helena," he said, tapping my monitor. "You're a rock star. Praise is cheaper than a paycheck. It's certainly cheaper than hiring a second analyst." This became the pattern. I would identify a critical vulnerability, our over-reliance on a single West Coast port, the lack of redundancy in our European air freight network. I would write a detailed risk assessment, complete with remediation plans and, crucially, a request for additional staff. I would present it. Julian would nod, looking impressed. Marcus Thorne would check his phone. My request would be marked low priority. When the official meeting minutes were distributed, my 10-page risk assessment would be sanitized into a single line: logistics protocols reviewed by Ms. Sparks. The urgency, the danger, the desperate need for resources, all of it just vanished from the official record. I realized the truth of my position. I wasn't an employee anymore. I was infrastructure. Invisible, like the plumbing. No one thanked me for the cargo flowing smoothly through the system. They only noticed when a pipe burst. And I understood something else. A system that relies on a single person is not a system. It is a critical vulnerability. I had become MGL's single point of failure, and they were treating me like a disposable part. The door opened 6 months ago. I was attending the Global Logistics Summit, using my own vacation days and paying my own way. MGL's training budget had been the first victim of the streamlining. I gave a presentation on a passion project, a concept I called the decentralized flow mesh. It was about building logistics networks that were resilient, flexible, and decentralized, systems that didn't have a single point of failure. After the talk, a woman approached me. She was sharp with an intense, focused energy. No small talk. "Eleanor Vance," she said, handing me a card. "CEO, Vanguard Dynamics. Vanguard, a major player, smarter and more tech-focused than MGL. Your mesh concept is brilliant," she said. "It's the way everyone should be thinking. You're wasted where you are." "I manage," I said. "We're building a new platform from the ground up," she continued, ignoring my deflection. "I don't need another operator. I have a team of operators. I need someone to look at our blueprints and tell me where the monsters are. Purely advisory. No operations." The offer was a weekend consulting gig. It involved reviewing architectural documents and offering high-level guidance. It was perfectly legal. It did not violate my MGL employment agreement, and it involved absolutely no access to Vanguard's live systems. It was a chance to be valued for my mind, not just my ability to put out fires at 3 a.m. I accepted. This was the moonlighting they thought they had caught me doing. They saw a blurry photo of me entering a building, and their paranoia filled in the rest. Their investigation was a pathetic joke. The Dalton Center isn't Apex Freight's headquarters. Apex leases 3 floors. The building directory, a massive digital display in the very lobby they saw me enter, lists over a dozen organizations. Apex is one. The Federal Transportation Authority is another. And on the quiet, discreet 22nd floor, a simple brass plaque reads the Argus Consortium. They saw the photo, they knew Apex was in the building, and they jumped to the conclusion that served their purpose. It was a spectacular failure of due diligence. In that cold conference room, they presented their evidence. They waited for my confession, but they never, not once, asked the simple, critical question. "Helena, what are the 2 jobs?" Here is the fact they overlooked. A fact that was sitting in my locked HR file, a file David Chen clearly never read. I do have a second job. It's on my employment intake forms. It's a role Julian Croft himself signed off on, likely without reading the paperwork. I carry another ID card. It identifies me as a civilian specialist in the National Logistics Reserve Corps. We are the digital National Guard for the nation's supply chain, activated during massive disruptions or national emergencies. My employment in this role is protected by federal mandate. Firing an employee because of their service in the reserve is explicitly, profoundly illegal. This alone would have made my termination a legal nightmare for them, but that wasn't even the worst part. I wasn't at the Dalton Center on Thursday for Vanguard. I wasn't there for the Reserve Corps. I was there for the Argus Consortium. Argus is a quiet, powerful nonprofit. They are the logistics world's independent auditors. They hold the continuity keys for dozens of major logistics firms, including, as of last year, Meridian Global Logistics. If a firm collapses or is hopelessly compromised, Argus activates and releases the system overrides and data keys to regulators, ensuring a controlled shutdown rather than a catastrophic failure that could cripple national infrastructure. MGL had to sign with them to get their last round of government contracts. I know this because I was the one who architected the integration, and I was the one who read Appendix 7C, Key Personnel Departure Protocol. The appendix is ironclad. It states that if the designated primary systems custodian, my title on that document, is terminated or resigns, a mandatory 72-hour security hold is placed on the company's master predictive and routing algorithms. During this hold, all automated high-volume processes are frozen. They are frozen pending a manual audit and key rotation ceremony, which must be supervised by both an Argus representative and the departing key custodian. That Thursday meeting was my quarterly check-in with the Argus Consortium, acting as MGL's designated custodian to review the very procedures they were about to violate. Marcus and Julian, in their arrogant, paranoid rush to execute me, had just fired their primary systems custodian. They had done it exactly 72 hours before the start of the Black Friday shipping surge, the single largest, most critical automated event MGL ran all year. It was a massive operation that always required a manual authentication override protocol at the start. An override protocol only I, as the key custodian, possessed. They thought they were firing a spy on a Monday morning. What they actually did was pull the pin on a grenade, drop it at their own feet, and start a 3-day countdown to a complete, system-wide logistical seizure. They had triggered the very security protocol I had helped design to prevent catastrophic failure, and they had done it at the worst possible moment. As I walked out of the MGL lobby, my personal phone in my hand, the cold November air on my face, I wasn't just unemployed. I was a landmine that had just been stepped on. The timer was ticking. Starting Monday, my first day at Vanguard Dynamics was like stepping into a different dimension. The contrast was a physical shock. I walked into the Vanguard offices on the 14th floor of a newer, brighter building. There was no walk of shame. Eleanor Vance met me at the elevator with a key card and a warm, no-nonsense smile. "Welcome, Helena," she said. "Your office is ready, but your team is waiting. We're eager to get started." My team. I walked into the main conference room. There were 12 people. Not 12 empty chairs or frozen positions on an HR chart. 12 living, breathing, intelligent specialists. Eleanor did the introductions. There was a lead infrastructure engineer, a data scientist, 2 senior logistics analysts who actually specialized in predictive modeling, a compliance expert, a project manager, and a half-dozen junior engineers who looked sharp, alert, and most importantly, supported. Their roles were distinct. They were not a heap of consolidated responsibilities. They were a functioning, fully staffed department. "Helena is here to lead our new supply chain solutions division," Eleanor announced. Her first task is to apply her decentralized flow mesh model to our own internal architecture. We build it here, we perfect it, and then we offer it to our clients. "Helena, the floor is yours." I stood by the whiteboard, a marker in my hand. It felt strange. I was used to being a lone defender, a firefighter. Now I was a builder and I had a crew. We started sketching. I put the core concepts of the mesh on the board. We began to debate, and it was a real debate. Rigorous, passionate, and completely professional. One of the junior engineers, a young woman named Kenji, pointed to a connection I'd drawn. "This node," she said, her voice respectful but firm, "it's geo-redundant, but what's the data failover protocol? If both the primary and the backup are hit by a coordinated denial of service, we'd see latency spike over 500 milliseconds, which breaches our client SLAs." She wasn't attacking me. She was improving the idea. Before I could answer, the infrastructure lead jumped in. "We could implement a tertiary hot site, but that's expensive. What if we use a distributed hash table for the routing keys instead? It's more resilient, the data scientist countered. But that complicates our compliance auditing. For the next 2 hours, we argued. We argued about logic, about risk, about cost, about efficiency. No one pulled rank. Ria sat in the back, observing, letting the process work. I had almost forgotten this feeling. This was what it was like to be in a room full of professionals who were all pulling in the same direction, whose egos were secondary to the quality of the work. We were outlining a mesh of fail-safes. The entire design philosophy was built on one principle: no single point of failure. No single server, no single data center, and no single person could ever bring the system down. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. Because across town, the single point of failure they had just fired was watching her old world begin to tear itself apart at the seams. At Meridian Global Logistics, the 72-hour Argus hold was in full effect. At 9:00 a.m. Monday, the first automated routing jobs for the week tried to run. They tried to authenticate with Ethelred. The system responded exactly as I had designed it to. Error 403. System in escrow, manual override required by custodian. The operations team, the ones who had ignored my training sessions, would have seen the alert. They would have classified it as one of Helena's weird alerts and tried to run the job manually. Access denied. The first small pebbles were rolling. By Tuesday morning, it was an avalanche. The logs from the thousands of failed Monday jobs had swollen, consuming all available disk space on the primary logging servers. The shipping queues, which had never been cleared, were now hopelessly clogged. Nothing from Monday had been dispatched. Now Tuesday's new shipments were pouring in. They hit the choked queues. They tried to authenticate against the frozen master algorithms. The system, starved of its core permissions, was beginning to seize. Service-level agreements, the sacred multi-million-dollar promises MGL made to its clients, were being breached one by one. The failure cascaded, just as I had warned Julian it would. It moved from the backend routing to the live client-facing tracking portals. Customers trying to see where their cargo was saw a spinning wheel of death. Shipments that were supposed to be in the air were still sitting on tarmac. Containers that should have been on trains were stuck at the port. MGL was, in real time, ceasing to be a logistics company and was becoming a digital paperweight. My personal phone, sitting on the polished Vanguard conference table, began to vibrate. It was a text from Ben, the air freight guy. Hey, weird Ethelred config error. Any ideas? Seeing a 403 on the master keys. I looked at the text. I looked at the whiteboard, now covered in a brilliant, collaborative design. I silenced my phone. An hour later, a call from an MGL desk number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. Then another text, this one from a frantic-sounding junior admin. Critical incident P0. All automated dispatches failing. Julian can't find manual override docs. PLS call. The calls became a stream. Panicked, desperate. They came from numbers I recognized. Julian, my old desk line, meaning someone was at my desk trying my phone, a blocked number, which I knew from experience was Marcus Thorne's personal cell. The phone buzzed so violently it rattled on the table. Elinor looked over, an eyebrow raised. Old business, I said. It can wait. One call from Julian. I picked up. I had to. His voice was a tight, high-pitched squeak. Helena, thank God. What's going on? Ethelred is completely locked. Argus is saying something about a custodian hold. We can't find the override. We need you, right now. I stood up and walked to the window of the conference room. I looked out over the city. I could see the MGL building, a gray monolith in the distance. I'm sorry, Julian, I said, my voice perfectly level, cold, and clear. I'm focusing on one position now. I hung up. I then blocked his number, Marcus's number, and every MGL exchange number I had memorized. Elinor walked over to me, holding a cup of coffee. She didn't ask about the call. She just gestured to the whiteboard. This is brilliant, she said. I just came from finance. They've approved the full budget for the prototype, all 12 of the Phase 1 servers, and the 4 new engineering hires you requested. She smiled. You asked for it, you justified it, and you got it. I trust you. Let me know what you need. My phone gave one last desperate buzz from an unknown number before I switched it to Do Not Disturb. A part of me, the part that had run on caffeine and adrenaline for 5 years, felt a sharp sting of guilt. But this was not my fault. This was not revenge. Revenge is an act of passion. This was an act of physics. This was cause and effect. The collapse was always coming. I just happened to be out of the building when it finally fell. Wednesday was when the world outside the MGL building began to notice. At Vanguard, my team and I were in a deep dive session, mapping out the business plan for the new consulting division. The first public alerts hit the financial news feeds around 2:00 p.m. A small headline on a specialized trading blog, MGL platform experiencing unconfirmed dispatch delays. An hour later, a more prominent wire service. Clients of Meridian Global Logistics report inability to track shipments. The dam had broken. MGL had officially breached the critical 24-hour dispatch window. This was no longer an internal IT problem. It was a systemic, market-facing failure. That evening, a push notification from a major national financial paper lit up my phone. Widespread disruption at major logistics provider. Meridian Global Logistics offline for 30-plus hours, citing critical infrastructure failure. Thursday morning was the execution. The stock market opens at 9:30 a.m. At Vanguard, my team and I gathered in the operations center. The MGL ticker symbol MGL was all anyone was watching. It didn't dip. It fell off a cliff. It gapped down at the opening bell, instantly shedding 10% of its value. Then 15%. The analysts on the financial news channels were shouting, "This is not a technical glitch. This is a crisis of confidence." We're getting word that regulators are launching an immediate, full-scale investigation into MGL's operational resilience. At 9:47 a.m., trading on MGL was automatically halted. When it resumed, the floor fell out. It stabilized finally at a loss of nearly 45%. 45% of their market capitalization, billions of dollars, wiped off the books in under an hour. The panic had now reached the architects of my dismissal. The first text was from David Chen, the HR man. "Helena, this is David. Please be advised our legal team is reviewing the circumstances of your termination. It's possible the action was hasty. Please call me to discuss reinstatement." The second text was from Marcus Thorne, the man who had smirked at me. His message was shorter. It was pure Marcus, double whatever they're paying. I stared at the two messages. I waited for the surge of triumph. It never came. I just felt hollow. They hadn't learned a single thing. I held my thumb over David's name and pressed delete. Then I did the same for Troy. I blocked both their numbers permanently. Late Thursday, I had just wrapped a long, productive strategy session with a leaner. My personal phone, still on silent, showed a missed call from a number I didn't recognize. A voicemail icon glowed. I played it on speaker in the silence of my apartment. The voice was deep, older, and stripped of all pretense. It was the sound of utter exhaustion. "Ms. Sparks, this is Arthur Sterling. I am the chairman of the board at Meridian Global Logistics. I am calling to inform you that as of 1 hour ago, Marcus Thorne and Julian Croft are no longer with this company. David Chen is on administrative leave." A heavy sigh crackled through the speaker. "We are in crisis, Ms. Sparks. The regulators are involved. Argus, they have briefed us on the situation. On the protocol you designed. We are paralyzed. We need your help." This was total, unconditional surrender. I waited 10 minutes. I drank a glass of water. I was not angry. I was not triumphant. I was a surgeon about to name her fee for an impossible operation. I dialed the number. Sterling picked up on the first half ring. "Sterling. Mr. Sterling, this is Helena Sparks returning your call." A sound of raw relief came through the phone. "Ms. Sparks, thank God. We need you to come in right now." "No," I said. The silence on the line was absolute. "I am not coming in," I clarified, my voice flat and cold as steel. "I am willing to provide advisory services on my terms, but before I say another word, we must agree on the price. My rate is $100,000 per hour. There is a 4-hour minimum, payable in advance. That is $400,000, wired to my personal account before this call proceeds any further." I heard a sharp intake of breath. The amount was staggering. It was also a rounding error compared to the billions they had lost. "And the money," I added, "is the easy part. If you agree to the price, we will then discuss my conditions." He was silent for a beat. He was realizing this was not a negotiation. He was a man at the bottom of a well, and I was the only one with a rope. "Agreed," he said, his voice strained. "What are the conditions? Get a pen, Mr. Sterling, or better yet, put your general counsel on the line. I want this recorded." I heard a muffled sound, then another voice, sharper, joined. "This is Maria Sandoval, General Counsel. I'm on the line." "Good, Ms. Sandoval," I said. "Here are the non-negotiable conditions for my engagement. Condition 1, I will not set foot in your building. All work will be conducted remotely. Condition 2, I will not touch your systems. I will not be given access. I will direct your remaining technical team. They will push the buttons. The liability for execution remains entirely with them. Is that clear? Yes, Sandoval, the lawyer said. She understood the genius of it. I was insulating myself from any future claim of sabotage. Condition 3. Meridian Global Logistics will issue a public, formal apology. It will state that the catastrophic failure was the result of senior leadership ignoring repeated, documented warnings from me, Helena Sparks, regarding system vulnerabilities and critical staffing deficits. Condition 4. You will authorize an immediate severance package of 6 months' pay for every member of the logistics and operations staff whose position was eliminated during the streamlining initiative over the last 2 years. Condition 5. You will authorize the creation of the supply chain strategy and security department structure I proposed last year. That is a fully funded team of 15, and it will report directly to the board of directors. It will report to you. And if I agree to all of this, you can fix it? Sterling asked, his voice cracking. I have one final condition, I said. Condition 6. Within the hour, I want signed copies of 2 documents. First, a renewal of your corporate commitment to the Argus Consortium, acknowledging the custodian protocols. Second, a reinstatement of your company's participation in the National Logistics Reserve Corps Liaison Program. Your legal team terminated both agreements this morning, citing my dismissal as the reason. You will reinstate them. You will find that my participation in the reserve is federally protected. I heard a sharp, sudden click as Sandoval hung up her extension. She was already sprinting to find out what kind of legal minefield Marcus and Julian had just marched them into. Sterling was alone on the line again. You are asking me to rebuild my company in exchange for a 4-hour phone call. I am asking you to pay the bill that has come due, I said. You have 60 minutes. The choice is yours, Mr. Sterling. I hung up. My email pinged. It was not 60 minutes. It was 20. The first email was from MGL's corporate bank, a wire transfer receipt, $400,000. The second email was from Arthur Sterling. The subject was agreement. Attached was a hastily drafted PDF, signed by him and notarized by Maria Sandoval. It contained every single one of my conditions. Condition 3, the public apology, was noted as in draft by communications, pending board approval. Condition 5, the new department was authorized to be ratified at emergency session 8:00 a.m. tomorrow. Condition 6, the Argus and National Logistics Reserve Corps documents were attached, signed. They had capitulated. I opened a new secure, encrypted video conference line. I sent the link to Arthur Sterling. His reply came almost instantly. My team is assembled. They are waiting for your instructions. I clicked Start Meeting. The timer on my $100,000 hour had begun. My camera was off. My microphone was muted. I joined the video conference as an observer. My screen filled with the pale, haggard faces of the MGL war room. It was a collection of shell-shocked junior engineers and mid-level managers I barely recognized. And sitting in the center, looking like he had aged a decade in 3 days, was Julian Croft. My blood ran cold. Sterling had lied. Or more likely, Julian's firing was a soft firing and he was being kept on as a hostage until the crisis was over. It didn't matter. He was there, a ghost at the feast, and his presence made this infinitely harder. You have the payment. You have my terms. My voice cut through the room, electronically flat, devoid of all emotion. We begin. I have just emailed the lead engineer on your list a document titled Ethelred Cascade Recovery. Open it. A young engineer, his hands visibly shaking, clicked his mouse. I have it, Ms. Sparks. It is a playbook, I said. It contains the precise sequence of operations required to restore the authentication system. You will follow it. You will not deviate. Am I understood? Yes. Yes, Julian stammered, leaning forward. Helena, we see it, but it's just a list of commands. There's no context. We don't understand the dependencies. Of course, they didn't. This was the trap I had set years ago. The documentation was a map, but I was the only one who held the legend. I will provide the context, I said. This is a command and control operation. Engineer, give me your screen. Read me line 1. It says, initiate read-only session to key escrow manager service account 77 alpha. That is correct, I said. You will execute that command. It will fail. It will return a permission denied error. I need you to run it fail and then read me the 32-character error hash it generates. Do it now. The room was silent. They were confused. But why? The engineer asked. Because the Argus protocol requires a failed, logged attempt from an unauthorized internal account before it will open the emergency port for the manual override key. It's an anti-tampering measure documented in the Argus appendix you all signed. Run the command, he typed. The screen flashed red. Access denied. A hash code appeared. Read it to me, he did. That hash is your one-time password for the next step, I explained. It proves you are acting under duress. Now proceed to line 2. For 4 hours, this was the rhythm. It was a brutal, relentless, high-stakes instructional. I was a remote control brain operating a dozen pairs of hands that did not understand what they were doing. Stop, I barked at one point. The engineer froze. You were about to execute that command against the production database, not the staging ledger. You missed a parameter. Read line 24 again, slowly. I'm sorry, he stammered. Do not be sorry, be accurate. You are currently holding billions of dollars of unprocessed shipments. Sorry does not fix a corrupted ledger. Rerun the command with the correct flag. They were drowning. The layered complexity I had managed alone was now revealed to them, and it was a Lovecraftian monster. At the 2-hour mark, in a brief moment while we waited for a server to reboot, Julian Croft unmuted his microphone. His face was ashen. Helena, he said, his voice thick. I need to say I know what I did. I know I let you down. I was a coward. I am so, Mr. Croft, I said, my voice ablade. It cut him off instantly. This is not that call. We are on the clock. You are paying me $100,000 an hour to fix a machine. My personal feelings are not included in that price. Engineer, is the server back online? Julian visibly flinched. He muted his microphone and did not speak again. At hour 3, minute 45, it happened. The final command was entered. Execute, I said. The engineer hit enter. For 10 seconds, nothing. Then, on the main status board, a single indicator light flipped from red to green. Then another and another. Authentication services are restored, the engineer whispered. The custodian hold is, it's released. Watch the dispatch queue, I ordered. On their screens, the queue, which had been frozen at 99% capacity for 3 days, suddenly began to move. The numbers ticked down. 98%, 85, 60. It's working, someone cried. The shipments are reconciling. The river had begun to flow again. It is not over, I said, silencing the room. The system is stable. It will clear the backlog in the next 12 hours, but your work is just beginning. You now have to manually audit the failed shipments from Monday and Tuesday against the successfully reconciled batches. A collective groan. And one final lesson, I said, for your fee. I had them pull up the knowledge base, my knowledge base. Navigate to Section 4B, Critical Incident Response. Now, Subsection 9, Key Escrow Protocols. The engineer clicked. And there it was. The entire playbook I had just walked them through. Every command, every flag, every contingency. It had been there, documented in meticulous, excruciating detail for the last 2 years. The documentation existed, I said, my voice echoing in the dead, silent room. You were all just too important, too busy, and too arrogant to ever read it. I clicked Leave Meeting. At that exact moment, my Vanguard-issued laptop pinged. It was an internal, company-wide announcement from a leaner Vance. Subject: Announcing the Vanguard Supply Chain Solutions Division. I am thrilled to announce that the board has unanimously approved the full formation of our new consulting division, to be led by our new director, Helena Sparks. We have approved an initial headcount of 20 specialists to support this initiative. A second email came in just to me from a leaner. Thought you'd like to see this. The first 3 signed letters of intent for our new division. All 3 were cornerstone clients at MGL. They terminated their contracts this afternoon and are moving to us. She added one last line. I have no idea what you've been doing all day, but I'm guessing it was complicated. What you are building here, Helena, we're setting a new standard. My personal phone vibrated. A news alert. It was the public statement from Meridian Global Logistics. It was a masterwork of legal groveling. And then, in the 3rd paragraph, there it was. This failure occurred despite repeated, multi-year, documented warnings from our former lead architect, Ms. Helena Sparks, whose expert recommendations were ignored by the now terminated leadership. They had done it. They had put my name in lights, not as a traitor, but as the prophet they had ignored. The email from Arthur Sterling arrived the next morning. It was a receipt for services rendered and a confirmation of terms met. He confirmed the appointment of a new chief supply chain officer, a Dr. Isabella Rossi, recruited from a national defense contractor. Her position was effective immediately, and as I had stipulated, her entire department, the department of 15 I had designed from the outside, would report directly to the board of directors. Sterling added a brief, chilling postscript. He had assembled a full internal audit team. "We have, in the last 12 hours," he wrote, "already identified 17 other critical-level vulnerabilities that were never escalated by Mr. Croft or Mr. Thorne. My warnings had not just been ignored, they had been actively buried. The market did not simply forgive. My 4-hour, $400,000 consultation had stopped the bleeding, but the patient was permanently scarred. MGL's stock stabilized, but it remained down a stubborn 30%. Billions in value incinerated. Their clients were fleeing. The trust, the only real currency in logistics, was gone. Weeks later, I stood on the main stage of the Global Logistics Summit. This was the same event where, just months earlier, I had given a niche presentation using my own vacation days. The same event where Alina Vance had approached me. Today, I was the keynote speaker. The introduction on the massive screen behind me read simply, "Helena Sparks, Director, Vanguard Supply Chain Solutions." I scanned the front rows. And then I saw them, sitting in the third row. Julian Croft. He looked hollowed out. Beside him, a sharp, imposing woman with intelligent, assessing eyes watched me intently. I knew instantly this was Dr. Isabella Rossi, the new CSCO of Meridian Global Logistics. My presentation was titled, "Human Infrastructure, the Anti-Single Point of Failure." I talked about resilience, not just in code, but in culture. I talked about the catastrophic cost of viewing your most critical technical staff as disposable commodities. I never mentioned MGL by name. I didn't have to. During the Q&A, a microphone was passed to the third row. Dr. Rossi stood. Her voice was clear and precise. "Ms. Sparks, Dr. Isabella Rossi, CSCO at Meridian. I have spent the last month reviewing the knowledge base and architectural documents you left behind." She paused, looking directly at me, a professional acknowledging another. "They are excellent, truly remarkable work, a masterclass in foresight." She sat down. The microphone was passed to Julian. He remained seated. He leaned forward, his face pale. "They were," he added, his voice barely a whisper, but the sensitive microphone picked it up and broadcast it to the entire room once we were finally forced to read them. The admission hung in the air. It was a confession. It was an epitaph. "Thank you, Dr. Rossi," I said. "Your acknowledgement means a great deal. And thank you, Julian. It just proves that some lessons, no matter how well documented, can only be truly understood through their consequences." The whispers started about a week after I sent the invoice. MGL's old guard, the lawyers who had served Marcus Thorne, began circulating a new narrative. They were facing shareholder lawsuits and regulatory fines that would run into the hundreds of millions, and they needed a scapegoat. Their new story was that the failure was not incompetence. It was sabotage. I was, they suggested, a disgruntled employee who had intentionally triggered the Argus protocol to extort the company. This narrative forced the hand of the House Subcommittee on National Supply Chain Security. They convened a formal hearing. The purpose was not to assign criminal guilt, but to determine the root cause of a failure that had destabilized a significant portion of the nation's commerce. The room was paneled in dark, imposing wood. At the head of the long table sat the 3 committee members, led by a formidable congresswoman named Chen. On one side sat MGL's new delegation, Arthur Sterling, Dr. Isabella Rossi, and their general counsel, Maria Sandoval. And at the end of their table, looking pale and diminished, was David Chen. On the other side of the table sat only me and Alina Vance. She was attending not as my lawyer, but as the director of Vanguard and an invited industry expert. After hours of procedural testimony, Congresswoman Chen turned her gaze to me. "Ms. Sparks, we have heard the timeline of events. We have read your invoices, and we have heard the allegations of sabotage. The floor is yours." I did not speak immediately. Instead, I reached into my briefcase. "Congresswoman, before I provide context, I would like to make a formal opening statement to clarify the facts of my employment." "Proceed," she said. I placed my old, deactivated MGL employee badge on the polished table. "This was my first job," I said clearly. "Lead Global Supply Chain Architect, Meridian Global Logistics. Terminated with cause on Monday, November 10th for alleged misconduct." Then I reached back into my bag and placed a second card next to it. This one was heavy-gauge plastic, deep blue, emblazoned with an official federal seal. "This," I said, "is my second job." I let them read the title embossed in gold. Civilian Specialist, National Logistics Reserve Corps. I looked across at David Chen. As a member of the NLRC, I am a part-time, on-call specialist activated during national emergencies. My employment in this role, as Mr. Chen knows from the intake forms I signed, is protected under federal statute. It is illegal to terminate an employee for their service in the reserve. A lawyer for MGL, one of the old guards, scoffed. That's irrelevant. You were terminated for moonlighting at a competitor, not for playing soldier. We have the proof. He nodded, and an aide placed a large photograph on an easel. It was the grainy, time-stamped image of me entering the Dalton Center. The Dalton Center, which, as we all know, houses the primary offices of Apex Freight. This was a clear conflict of interest. I'm glad you brought that up, I said. I reached into my briefcase a final time and produced a stapled, bound document. I slid a copy to Congresswoman Chen and another across the table to Maria Sandoval. This is not a competitor's contract. These are the official, notarized meeting minutes from the Argus Consortium, dated Thursday, November 6th, the meeting that your photograph so helpfully documented. Sandoval's eyes scanned the first page, and I saw her jaw tighten. Dr. Rossi leaned over to read it, her expression shifting from curiosity to sharp, focused understanding. If you will turn to page 2, I continued, you will see the attendee list. It includes compliance officers from the consortium, and it includes me, but it also includes my capacity. I was not attending as Helena Sparks, private citizen. I was not attending on behalf of Vanguard Dynamics. I read the line item aloud. Attending, Helena Sparks, acting in dual capacity as 1, Meridian Global Logistics, designated primary systems custodian, and 2, the National Logistics Reserve Corps, assigned liaison to audit and approve the quarterly escrow key recovery test plan for Meridian Global Logistics. I let the words hang in the dead air. I was in the Dalton Center, as seen in your photograph, performing a mandatory, high-level security function for Meridian, a function required by the very protocols your company signed to secure its government contracts. The meeting was with the nonprofit that holds your master keys, a meeting Mr. Julian Croft was scheduled to attend but canceled at the last minute, forcing me to go in his place. I looked from David Chen to Arthur Sterling and then finally to Congresswoman Chen. I was fired for working 2 jobs. My employers, in their rush to judgment, never bothered to ask me what those 2 jobs actually were. They accused me of working for a competitor, a fact they could have disproven with a single phone call. They accused me of betraying them when I was, in fact, at that very moment, acting to protect their most critical assets. The silence in the room was absolute. Congresswoman Chen looked up from the minutes, her voice ice. Ms. Sandoval, Mr. Sterling, can you confirm for this committee that Meridian Global Logistics is a signatory to the Argus Consortium Charter? Maria Sandoval could barely speak. Yes, Congresswoman, we are. And are you, Chen continued, also a participant in the National Logistics Reserve Corps Liaison Program, which protects the employment of its members? The signature on behalf of MGL on both documents appears to be a Mr. David Chen. Every eye in the room turned to David. He had signed the documents, and then, a year later, he had personally signed my termination letter for having the very job he had approved. He stared at his hands, his face a mask of gray, professional ruin. Congresswoman Chen closed her folder. The sound was a gavel. This committee finds no evidence of sabotage, extortion, or malfeasance on the part of Ms. Sparks. The catastrophic failure at Meridian Global Logistics was a direct, predictable, and self-inflicted wound caused by a gross violation of the company's own internal procedures and a stunning lack of due diligence. This hearing is concluded. That same afternoon, Helen North had booked the grand ballroom at the Four Seasons for the official launch of the Supply Chain Solutions Division. The room was packed. My entire team of 20 specialists occupied the front 2 rows. They were sharp, confident, and they looked like a team that was ready to build an empire. After the official announcements, a reporter from the Wall Street Journal, the same one who had broken the story of MGL's collapse, held the microphone. Ms. Sparks, she said, for all the executives here today, what is the single biggest lesson you've learned from this? The room went silent. The lesson is simple, I said. Never ever let your entire organization's security, its stability, or its future rest on just one pair of shoulders. It's not a person, it's a vulnerability. As another reporter began to stand, the phone I had placed on the podium vibrated. It was an email from Arthur Sterling. The subject line was final confirmation of all terms. It was an itemized list, a final accounting of his surrender. The new department was funded. The severance fund was established. The corporate charters were renewed with a 10-year non-cancelable clause, and a link to the front page of the financial section of a major national paper. There, in the top column, was MGL's paid, formal apology, exactly as I had dictated it. I tapped my phone, forwarding the entire email chain to the internal distribution list for my new team at Vanguard. I typed a new subject line: Case Study, the total quantifiable cost of ignoring a warning. It was their first official piece of training material. As we pushed through the service exit, a figure stepped out of the shadows. It was David Chen. His suit hung on him. His face was a grayish-white. "Ms. Sparks," he stammered, "I just wanted to say I apologize." It was the weak, pathetic apology of a man who had lost everything because he couldn't be bothered to do his job. I felt nothing. "A strong organization, Mr. Chen," I said, my voice quiet, "is one that knows how to ask the right questions before pushing the button. You're just lucky you still have an organization left to learn from." From the ballroom behind us, a sudden wave of applause erupted. The massive LED screen on the stage had just changed. It was a welcome to the clients who had already signed on to the new Vanguard division. There, at the bottom of a list of 9 other logos, was the name of MGL's largest, most prestigious client. They were our 10th. I walked back out of the hallway into the light. The applause swelled. I stepped back to the podium, the cameras flashing, the faces of my new team looking up at me. I leaned into the microphone. "I was fired for working 2 jobs," I said, my voice clear and ringing with absolute finality. "This time, I'm still working 2 jobs, building for a place that knows how to listen, and leaving the other with a lesson in listening it will never forget." The sound that followed was not applause. It was a roar.